Welcome to session 16, part C. Um, okay. By the way, I think this is going to be the final part of session 16. I think it's going to be short. So the all three parts of session 16 are going to be 50 to 60 minutes, much less than I intended. The main reason is just because chapter 11, I think, is a little shorter and doesn't have as many tricky concepts as the others. So I'm going to make session 16 and session 17 a little shorter than than the typical session. Um, I'm going to wrap this up. The one key thing I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to call government policies that are usually justified as a solution to a market failure. And in a typical economics class, when you talk about what does government do, you usually say we have government to solve market failures. Okay. I'm going to talk about some other cases that government does that are not this way, but for the moment, let's say what are some typical policies that would fit in this category. One is national defense. Okay, so I mentioned that two key market failures are externalities and monopoly. Another one is public goods, and I hesitated to make it a third category because public goods, it's kind of the same as a positive externality, but you can make it a separate category, and often people will call national defense a public good. You could also call it a positive externality. It's something that if you contribute to the national defense, I benefit from that. You could call that positive externality. Um, Another government policy is just roads, bridges, lots of government works. Often these are public good, especially things that are non-excludable. By the way, if I was teaching this course, 30, 40 years ago, we would say roads are non-excludable, but they're really not, because there's such a thing as a toll road, and we'd say, well, but the transactions costs are so high for a toll road, you got to have these toll booths, and it takes people's time. Well, 30 years ago it was that way. Now we've got Easy Pass, where really you don't have to have the toll booths, and roads actually are it's possible to exclude people from them. Although it would be very difficult. I think there'd be lots of transaction costs for local roads. So maybe for an interstate highway, it's easy. Things are excludable, but for local roads, I think they still are pretty much. We would call them public goods because they are so hard to. They don't have the excludability. It is hard to exclude people from using them. Another policy that would be under this category, solutions to a market failure, be environmental regulation. Okay. Here we have a negative externality, pollution. So government steps in to solve that market failure. Another one, antitrust regulation. The market failure is monopoly. Now, I'm going to talk in a second about policies. Here, I'll write it now, okay? So, government policies that usually justified as a solution to a market failure. There's also government policies um, that are not usually not justified or not given as their main justification as solution as that are not justified as a solution to a government failure. I'm going to give three examples just a second. I'll switch markers. Black's going out. So get 3 examples of this in just a second. But these 3 examples, usually they're justified not as a solution to government, as a solution to market failure, but rather via paternalism is their main justification. So before I give those examples, let's first define paternalism. By the way, this almost surely, very, very likely is going to be a question on the exam. So write this in your notes. If you're actually watching this video, write down, I may ask a question, what is paternalism? Give a 2-sentence explanation of what that means. By the way, the book calls it parentalism. Okay. Now, paternalism comes from, I think it's the Latin root word, means fatherlyism. Okay. So that's a little sexist, and the book has changed it to parentalism. Okay. By the way, when I ask the question on the exam, I'm not going to say what is parentalism. I'm going to use paternalism, because actually parentalism is a little bit easier to remember what it means, or to guess what it means. Paternalism isn't. But still, this is something that not everyone calls it parentalism. In fact, when people talk about that concept, more people call it paternalism still than they call it parentalism. So you need to know what that means, paternalism. By the way, so the question I will ask on the exam is, what is paternalism? I will not ask, what is parentalism? Okay. Paternalism is, let's see. Okay, in our context, it's when government acts as a parent in choosing policies, as it treats the people like children. Okay, another way of saying it, in this case, government assumes that people don't know what's best for themselves. Okay, so let me give you an example of that. One key example of a government policy that is justified, whose main justification was parentalism, is Social Security. Okay, so a lot of people think, oh, Social Security, this is just a transfer of money from younger people to older people. No, that's not quite what it was billed as. Social Security, the idea is that there are, this was sometime around the 1930s, early 1930s, I think, when this was started, that there were a lot of old people who were starving in their old age. And they said, this is a bad thing, why not change this? And so they set up a program where it would basically force people to save for their old age. Okay. Now, even though there is partly this redistributionist aspect to Social Security, where we're actually taking money from the young people and giving it to old people, that's not quite what it was billed as, at least in the early days of Social Security. That this was, no, we're not, this is not a charity program. This is basically just a forced savings program. You, young people, are going to be forced to save, put money in the Social Security pot, and you'll get back approximately about as much as you put into it. Okay, and the idea, and you may ask though, well, why do I need to do that? Why do I need to save for myself? I'm an adult. I can decide the right amount to save. And here, government is saying, no, we don't think you are capable of making that decision. By the way, economists usually treat um, uh, the normal goal of economists is to say, okay, here are the preferences of these people. Let's show you what happens when people have those preferences. We don't say anything about whether these preferences are good or bad. We just take them as given. Okay, in other subjects, anthropology, sociology, they may say, no, these are the preferences you should have. Economists never do that, okay? Basic Social Security is acting not like an economist. So usually we say whether you you earn some money, whether you spend it now or spend it later, that's just a preference. Some people have preferences for patience. Some people have preferences for spending money now. And we say that's just your own preference, and we're not going to say whether that's good or bad. That's typical what economists say. With Social Security, the government is not doing that. They're saying, no, no, no. If you're the type person who wants to spend all your money now, we're saying that's the wrong preference to have. Economists usually don't like to do that. But here's the case. And when that happens, we call it paternalism. Okay. Government is acting like a parent. Okay. So that is one example. Um, uh, Another example of this um, is medical drug regulation. So the idea, basically, main thing that the FDA does, the Food and Drug Administration does. The book mentions this is a case of regulation of voluntary exchange. Okay. So here's the idea. So here's an example. Suppose I'm a cancer patient. I learn I have cancer, and I have a very low likelihood of living. And my doctor tells me, oh, there's this experimental drug. It probably won't work. It may have these really bad side effects. It's not clear you should take it. And I may say, no, I'd like to. I'd like to try this out. Well, the FDA may prevent me from taking that drug. The FDA may make it illegal, and so you may ask though, well, suppose let's make this more concrete. Suppose the company that makes this drug is Merck, is to pick a example of a pharmaceutical company. Suppose it costs them $500 per year for a year's supply of that drug. I need a year's supply, and I'm willing to pay $100,000 for this. So think about the value created. It's 100,000 minus 500, so 99,500. That's a lot of value that could be created if just we can make that exchange, yet the FDA is disallowing it. Okay, that is not the case of a market failure. This would not be the case of an externality. Okay, you could say, oh, there's some bad side effects to that drug. Yeah, but the side effects only happen to me, and I'm part of the exchange. I'm the one buying the drug from Merck. So we would not call this an externality. Okay, so this is the only justification is one of paternalism, so that the government is telling me, the potential patient, that I don't know what's best for myself. Okay, you could say maybe that's still good, but economists would say would be reluctant to implement such a policy. We would say that if it's not a solution to market failure, it's not clear we want to implement that policy. But regardless, a lot of non-economists are often in favor of paternalism, and this would be a case. And then finally, a third case um, is um, so I had medical drugs, just call it recreational drugs, or in a very particular case, well, in fact, all recreational drugs, uh, the regulation of that are often justified by paternalism. There's some cases where you say, well, these recreational drugs, there may be an externality if you take the drug, then say go out driving and cause harm to other people. That would be an externality. But there's some cases, and I think the main justification for outlawing recreational use drugs is paternalism. And there's one case that is pretty much the sole justification of it, and this is alcohol sales to minors. Okay, so lots of them, especially if you're under 16, you're not going to be driving anyway. So there's no externality of you causing a traffic hazard or a wreck from your car. So it's not an externality. The justification is that it's just we, the government, is saying it's bad for you. Now, this is interestingly a case where we call it paternalism, and the government is acting like a parent to an actual case where the people involved are children. So maybe this is a reasonable application, a reasonable policy to actually use paternalism. But regardless, here's three examples of paternalism. All of these are cases we would not call, we would not say these policies are, at least for the most part, are not justified as a solution to market failure. Um, okay, the final point, I want to add one more, though, to here, and just briefly talk a little bit about what the book mentioned. The book mentioned one more policy that we might put in the case as solutions to market failure, and this is some of the cases of what do they call it, just income redistribution. Okay. Okay. So especially welfare, so payments to the poor, and we would often call this, an economist would often call this a public good or possibly a positive externality. And the idea is that when we give money to the poor, who benefits? Well, the poor do, but that's not all. So those of us, middle class, upper middle class, who are giving the money, we get a good feeling just knowing that the poor people are not suffering. Okay, we get a warm glow, and you know, those of us with empathy, and that's just about all of us, we feel better if we know that. So that warm glow feeling to the non-poor people is a positive externality. You could say it's also a public good. It's hard to exclude that. And here's the idea behind that. So let's say Jeff Bezos, rich billionaire, is giving money to homeless shelters in Fairfax County. So not only does Jeff Bezos feel good about that, I do too. I, Tim Groseclose, as just a resident of Fairfax County, say, you know, I get a warm glow feeling. Even though I'm not giving the money, I just get a warm glow feeling knowing that the poor are not suffering. Now, for that reason, this aspect, Jeff Bezos is giving money, is non-excludable. He can't exclude other middle class people from getting that warm glow feeling. For that reason, we would call what he does a public good. When he's giving money to the poor, it's a public good that lots of us benefit from. And for that reason, if it's a public good, there can be a free rider problem. I say, yeah, I'd like to help the poor, but hey, if Jeff Bezos is going to do it, no need for me to donate any money. And poor Jeff Bezos is the one who has to do all the donating. It's possible you can imagine a situation where all of us, you don't get enough donations if you don't have enough Jeff Bezos in the world, and it could be a possibility where all of us, middle class and upper class citizens would say we would like to force all of us to give a little bit more to the poor so we can all get more of that warm glow feeling. And if that's the case, we would say here's a genuinely public good, and this is a justification for government involvement. Okay, so that would be one more example in that first category. Okay, so that is part C. As I said, I think I took parts A, B, and C, took about 55 minutes to an hour. So I'm going to end it there. That is session 16. Stay tuned. Session 17, I'll finish up chapter 11 and do some of the problems in the back of chapter 11. Okay, so see you in a few days for session 17.